Okay, I'm having some problems here, so you won't have me on the camera, but you can hear my voice, I think. Welcome to the Super Show. Appreciate everybody tuning in once again. We are in week 9 of the college football season. I'm, of course, your host, Walter Waddell, a.k.a. Dub Deuce 85, joined, as always, by my co-host and co-pilot, Jake Kucheck, fresh off his trip to Hawaii, a week late, man. I thought, maybe it would have worked a little bit better if you went and saw some Heisman Genti there, but I'm sure you had a great time. We are going to be doing our normal thing here, covering each game, all 12 from the DraftKings main slate, talking about core plays, any sneaks, of course, underdogs, prize picks, and any betting opportunities as well. But before we get into all that stuff, Jake, would you talk a little bit about how that vacation went and how this maybe refresh period has done you a solid?
Yeah, man, it was a good time. Traveling with the family, 2 young kids. So everyone says, "Oh, Hawaii must be super relaxing." Well, it didn't quite work out that way with 2 kids 5 and under. It was a bunch of chasing them around, and it's a good time though. Got to stay at the Disney resort, do the Disney thing. They loved it, ate it up. Just perfect family time. Didn't play any DFS because that's not true. I actually did register a lineup before I left, but only one lineup on the main slate, and got a little bit destroyed on that one. Didn't have the requisite time to put into it, so I'm glad I played just the one lineup and kind of mentally checked out for it. We did get our boy Caden Durham having the explosive game on the late slate, so that was fun and good to see. I didn't get to clean up on it by the time I went to register. Already in Hawaii, banned sport there. I think all of DFS is banned there, so that part of it was rough. But yes, nice to mentally reset and recharge and hit the ground running for this last stretch of the season where we make money during conference play, man. And I'm excited for it. I'm pumped for this week, pumped for the late slate. Already got started on the article for that, and see a lot of different spots that are going to be profitable, but also excited to jump into this one with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're getting through the week here with these 2 and 3 game slates with some Conference USA Sun Belt. So we're staying sharp here, entering the war chest. But yeah, we're starting to see a real difference with some of the DVP spots, our research, working on some projection stuff. So I'm definitely feeling great here as we enter week 9. All right. If you're watching live here on YouTube or X/Twitter, whichever you prefer to call it, please make sure you smash that like button or repost on the Twitter machine. It helps us a great deal. And if you're watching live and want to interact with us via questions, comments, and concerns, please do so. We will now be entering the realm of slate breakdown time. Notre Dame versus Navy is going to kick us off. And you probably at the beginning of the season would have never thought to have seen this game on a main slate. But Navy comes into it threatening to maybe make the playoff. They've been real good. They're 13-point dogs to Notre Dame, but the total is 51. And I kind of got a question about that because offensively, we know both of these teams are going to be deliberate. But definitely a fun game. And who would have thought this would be one that Notre Dame, if they win, they might get themselves back in the conversation for the playoff when it looked like they might have been dead a couple of weeks ago. What are we doing with this one?
Yeah, so it's going to really depend on your take on this Navy team and if they're for real or not. I think that the way that I see them is this is a defense and a structure of a system that works extremely well against inferior competition. Dominate in the trenches, control the game, control the clock, just bludgeon their opponent into submission, which you can do when the opponent is Charlotte or when the opponent is UAB, even against Air Force or Temple. They had that Memphis game where things got a little bit out of hand. They put up 100 points in that game between the two teams. And I think what we saw there is when they aren't able to control the entire game environment by controlling the line of scrimmage, it's just chaos. It's just absolute chaos. And what that translates to is it turns into a shootout, which is fantastic for DFS purposes, right? Um, I think it was an Army Wake game. It was like 4 or 5 years ago now, where it was just like some ridiculous score, like 65-53, that it ended up being something crazy like that. But it was the same. It was the same thing where it's a service academy school that gets out of their environment into a game where, okay, we do not have a physical advantage over this opponent, so we're just going to have to use all of our other tricks to kind of sneak away with a win in this one. And Notre Dame definitely has the physical advantage on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I think they will be able to have a lot of success on offense. The question is, can Navy keep up? And in past years, in past iterations of the Navy offense, where there wasn't a lot of a vertical passing game integrated into that offense, I would say no chance, no shot. Notre Dame's going to run away with this one. Not here. I think we're going to see some fight from Navy. I think we're going to see them score some points. 56-44 would be a heck of a thing to replicate, like happened in the Memphis game. And I certainly don't think that Navy's going to blow Notre Dame out of the water, but I do think they'll keep up. So definitely like an over, if that's what you were hinting at before. And I also think that there are some viable plays from both sides of this one. Obviously we did pretty well with Riley Leonard against Stanford. I think I had him as my play of the week, my game breaker of the week, getting to 404. He didn't quite get there on the yardage, but he did get the 4 touchdowns. So I'm going to chalk that up as like an 80% win. Didn't really need him to do a whole lot against Georgia Tech, but they are going to need him in this one. And once again, it's Riley Leonard time all the time. Only 6 touchdowns through the air all season, but another 10 on the ground shows you how he chooses to score, and also is somewhat of a function of his limited pass catchers and his ability to get in on the ground. So love Riley Leonard at 8,800. He's definitely in play. You can look to the running backs. Pretty large price discrepancy now between Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love. I think that more or less matches up with the usage. Jeremiah Love obviously is kind of separated himself as a lead back as opposed to a 1A, 1B scenario. Doesn't mean you can't use a 3,200 Jadarian Price, because he can still get there. He's just not going to see necessarily the volume of touches, especially in what we think will be a more competitive game. But I like Leonard quite a bit more than I like either of those. And then the pass catching options are always going to be a crapshoot with Notre Dame because of how much Riley Leonard runs the ball. You really need, kind of a long touchdown with one of those passing options. We could get that from a cheap Bo Collins. We could get that from a cheap Jaden Greathouse. We could get that from a cheap Chris Mitchell. All of those guys are viable, but not reliable, if that makes sense. Really, I just want to use Riley Leonard from this one on the Notre Dame side. On the Navy side, could you pair the quarterbacks in this one? I mean, Blake Horvath has been a fantasy monster, especially in that Memphis game. Is 66.1 DraftKings points the highest individual performance outside of Ashton Jaunty on the season? I think it might be, right? It's got to be close.
I think, for this season, yeah, definitely, for sure.
Yeah, for talking this season. So in that game, he only threw the ball 12 times, which is kind of what you think of in the Navy offense. Did go for 192 and 2 touchdowns, but ran for 211 yards and 4 touchdowns. So he's also got some running capability. The question is, who do we think is going to be more efficient against the defense that they're facing? I think Riley Leonard's got a better shot to get it done against the Navy defense, who's just not going to be able to keep up. I think the Notre Dame defense is going to at least put up some resistance against Blake Horvath. The running backs are quite a bit cheaper. Eli Heidenreich is technically a running back per the positions on DraftKings. However, he does most of his damage in the passing game. Over 100 yards twice so far this season, receiving, once rushing. So you do get some of both, but you're going to get about equal rushing attempts and pass catches. So yes, he's a running back position on DraftKings, but definitely gets work in the passing game. Alex Tezka is more of a traditional, will get carries with some volume and also see moderate work in the passing game. Only 4 catches on the season, so that's not really what we're expecting from him. And he has done more of his damage in games that were blowouts. In that Memphis game that went crazy, he only ended up with 10 carries for 58 yards, didn't really do much damage. It was kind of Horvath and Heidenreich that were the ones that really benefited in this one. And then if you want to get really far into the Navy depth chart in terms of receivers to actual receivers, Nathan Kent is the closest thing there is to a receiver you might consider, but there are just as viable receivers on the Notre Dame side that I would prefer to use because they are a more typical downfield passing team, even with Riley Leonard under center. So probably going to focus on Heidenreich on the Navy side and Leonard on the Notre Dame side with some ancillary pieces mixed in.
Yeah, it's fun to see that one on here. I feel like I'm going to be underweight compared to some of the other stuff that's on here, but certainly exciting when we can see some service academies matter. That Navy Army game might be a fun one down the road. All right, moving on to one that is going to be quite popular, North Texas versus Tulane. You guys have heard me over the last couple of weeks. I've mentioned in Discord, man, this North Texas team is crazy. They scored 1 million points again. They are 8-point dogs at home, total of 67. This is one that I feel will easily sail over 70. You guys know Tulane is a team that I have an affinity for. I definitely like Darian Mensah, and I think this is going to be a really fun game. Unpopular one, but it's not one that I think we need to get like too crazy with and try to fade the chalk. When there's chalky pieces that I think, maybe are a little subpar, which we'll get to in the Missouri game. This is one I don't want to try and get too cute. I think we can beat them somewhere else. Starting with the Tulane side, you do have the freshman, Darian Mensah, who is the primary quarterback here. There is some looks that we get, especially in the red zone packages there for Ty Thompson, mostly running stuff. So he's a threat to kind of steal touchdowns down there, but not really to steal any passing work. And Mensah's, he struggled a bit with his accuracy, but he's still been fairly decent this year. And his overall accuracy for the season sitting around 63.2%. And he has some really nice weapons around him. Now, early in the season, he was very sharp. That game against Kansas State, really, really good. That's kind of put him on the map for me. And then he showed out against USF also, but he's had some down games here. One thing, though, is he's not throwing interceptions. He's got just the 2 interceptions to 11 touchdowns, and mainly it's just been those lack of touchdowns that have kind of hurt him. He has thrown for over 1,400 yards, and he's not much of a rushing threat, which also doesn't give him a lot of upside. So that area of his game is pretty non-existent right now, and he does take sacks. He's got to start to figure out how to avoid those sacks. But again, you look at what he did against Kansas State and USF, 2 of the better opponents on their schedule, and it does give me some hope that he can have a good game here. And he does actually lead the AAC in yards per attempt. So he's got, Super Mario, he's got Dante Fleming, Keith Brown, some options that are downfield guys that can take advantage. He is only priced near the min at 5K. And there's going to be a handful of guys below 6K that I've mentioned them in the Discord, 3 or 4 that I'm actually looking at as serious, viable candidates for a main lineup. I don't think Mensah will get there for me, but I do really like him. He's a GPP type of look. The running back here that'll be very popular, at least he should, is Mekhi Hughes. This North Texas rush defense, they're giving up about 4.4 yards per carry, which puts them near the bottom of the American Conference. And just going through, 3 of their last 4 opponents. Mario Anderson last week, you mentioned Memphis being in a shootout. They tend to do that a lot. This was a high-scoring game against North Texas. Mario ran for 183 yards and 4 touchdowns, also caught 5 passes, so added that receiving work. A couple of weeks back, FAU, Florida Atlantic team that's not very good whatsoever, but C.J. Campbell did rush for 89 yards and a touchdown. He also caught 6 passes for 74 yards. We're getting some receiving work. And then you have Taj Brooks, who is just an absolute king. He had 109 yards and a touchdown against them. It wasn't a very competitive game, so a little bit for him lackluster, I know, but still 3 dominant performances by running backs. No reason to think that Mekhi Hughes isn't going to be the 5th or 4th guy to really blow the doors off of this defense, especially with them being around 8-point favorites here. The obvious way to stack is to go towards the North Texas passing side, which we'll talk about here, and play Mekhi Hughes on the other side, who's coming off that game against Rice, in which he racked up 140 yards on 27 carries. So we can expect 20-plus touches from him. He's not a big-time receiver by any means, but that is an area that DVP-wise this defense gets beaten by. At receiver, you have some relatively cheap options. Mario Williams a bit spendy at 6'1". Probably can't get there with him. Earlier this season, we were all about Mario Williams. Had him in that game against K-State. Really like him. We know how talented he is. Has been a bit quiet lately, and that's just because of the lack of touchdowns in this offense. We've seen some deep balls to Dante Fleming, who's sitting there at 4-4, and then Keith Brown at 4-2. He's also been scoring. The tight end, Alex Bowman, he is dealing with an injury, so he's questionable. He had those very first 2 games where he caught 3 touchdowns in those first 2 games. No longer really viable even when healthy. So you're really looking at Mario Williams, 42 targets, Keith Brown, 26, and Dante Fleming, 26. But again, none of those guys are really main team looks, more on the Mekhi Hughes side. At the North Texas part of it, Chandler Morris, you may remember that name, transferring in from the Big 12. He's thrived in this video game-esque offense, and North Texas is a very fun team. The price of Morris is $8.9K. Well worth it in the shootout. He could be $10K, and I know I'm kind of adamantly against paying up for quarterbacks that high, but this would be one I'd have to really think about it. 8-9, I don't have to really think too hard. 61 pass attempts in that close game against Memphis last week. He's completed right around 63.5% of his passes on the year. 2,400 yards, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He's also added about 143 on the ground. So Morris, lots of passing volume. This is a game where he's going to probably throw 50-plus times. We love it. The running back room, opposite of Tulane, not a lot of interest there. They have 4 or 5 guys. 2 of them have been injured since the beginning of the year. So Shane Porter and Mackenzie McGill are sharing those duties right now. Both have flash double-digit upside and are a cheap price point. But that's more of like if you're doing MME and you want some stacks of this game that nobody else is going to do, then you could use like a Shane Porter and then use the Tulane passing game. That would be your alt build. But the prize is DT Sheffield, who is an absolute stud, worth paying up for. I ordinarily prefer to pay up at running back, get like a mid-level quarterback, right, and then just cheap out on wide receivers. But this week, I got to pay up for wide receiver, and not just one, but I got to pay for 2 wide receivers this week, one being DT Sheffield. Leads the team in targets with 61, 42 catches, 563 yards, and 9 touchdowns. He's also rushed for 82 yards and a score, so that is somebody that they will get the ball to at any means. Right now, Damon Ward, who had 50 fantasy points against South Alabama in week 1, has been hurt. He banged up in the last couple of weeks and hasn't played at all. So him being out obviously helps quite a bit. Those targets have all gone to DT Sheffield. We'll monitor award status, but either way, I'm playing him. And then we have kind of the sneak, I guess, for value. I really like Dalton Carnes. He wasn't even on the Underdog player pool this week in Battle Royale. Annoying. Second on the team right now with targets, 37. He's been the main benefactor with Ward being out. 20 catches, 268 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's only 3-1. Usually we get the question every week, like, who's a 3-1 receiver? I got, this last spot below 3-5, and we have to kind of, pinch our noses and look under the garbage pails. This is a really solid, viable, possibly optimal 3.1K receiver in a very powerful offense. And I don't think a lot of people are going to go there because there's going to be some of these other chalkier pieces like a Jeremy Bernard again, Marcus Carroll, some other ones that we're going to talk about. So I think we might get Carnes below 10%, which is a huge edge across over the entire field. You also have Blair Conright, 23 targets this year, 18 catches for 330 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's also benefited from more of a deep threat. And then Wyatt Young is currently the WR4, 11 catches, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns on 22 targets. So again, this offense is mega powerful. Looking at it right now, it's a very easy kind of 4-stack, and I do believe 3 of them will be popular, that being Chandler Morris, Mekhi Hughes, and DT Sheffield. I feel like those 3 haven't really gotten into any ownership stuff yet, but tomorrow afternoon, I feel like we're going to see above 20% on all of those guys. And then that 4th piece for me being Dalton Carnes, who is all the way down there at 3-1. So starting your lineup with those 4 is a very good way to do it. Sometimes it's just that easy. We like to get away from the chalkier stacks. But North Texas games have continued to be must-see TV. I'm excited they're on the slate. There were a couple of games like North Carolina, Virginia that I felt like, man, we should have got them on the slate. But I'm happy to have this one between North Texas and Tulane. We'll be stacking it multiple ways. But yeah, I'm looking at probably 4 pieces in my main lineup right now from this game alone. Short-sighted perhaps, but I feel extremely good about it. Is there anything you want to add there? I don't know if you've had a chance to see any North Texas. I know you hear me murmuring about them, but I know you see the total there. So obviously lots of goodness here to be had.
Yeah, man. How about Chandler Morris? What a winding road for him. But yeah. I do think that they'll be popular. I do like the cheaper receiver. Carnes is a shout. And I also have some cheap running backs and cheap receivers lined up for you to help fit those expensive guys into. So we'll get into that.
Awesome. All right, we will move on. Oklahoma versus Ole Miss. Total of 49, and the Rebels 20-point favorites. The carcass that is the Oklahoma team. They have like their offensive coordinator. It was one of those like I think get step down or get fired. He stepped down on his own accord, but they got to do something. They're on the morphine drip for sure. What do you like in this one?
What happened to this Oklahoma team, man? Just everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And not just losing, but losing in like embarrassing fashion to I like South Carolina. They're a good program, but man, 35 points from South Carolina, that's tough. And not even getting to double digits, putting up points of their own accord. So see this being a pretty tough one for Oklahoma to be able to put up a fight, even with Ole Miss coming off that awful loss at LSU. Had a week to lick their wounds and get back into it. And, they're going to be pretty focused on the task at hand and, taking Oklahoma to the woodshed. And it's kind of the perfect team for Ole Miss to see on the schedule. And so, do we think that this is going to be a game that Jackson Dart, shows out and throws 50 times? Probably not. I think this one gets out of hand pretty quickly. I think the defense, for Ole Miss is going to show up and get some turnovers and get some 3-and-outs to the point that Ole Miss is just going to have the ball a lot. Not going out of my way to use Jackson Dart. I would see that as a pretty deep tournament throw. Don't see it being too much of a back and forth shootout, just Ole Miss getting to do whatever they want. I also see them not really wanting to give Henry Parrish his typical 20-touch allocation. Probably going to stop him at more like 12 to 14. He could score a touchdown or 2 because they'll be in good field position for most of the game. But I don't think they're going to want to wear him out too much with the thick of conference play coming up. An interesting play on the Ole Miss side. We saw Ulysses Bentley get some touches against LSU in that game. 11 for 107 and a touchdown, got a reception out of the backfield as well. Henry Parrish's health had something to do with that, but we also, don't know if Henry Parrish is all the way back. We don't know if they're going to limit his touches because of the score. And a 3K Ulysses Bentley with positive game script. We've seen what he can do in the past, and even back to his days at SMU when it was like, well, is it going to be Judkins or is it going to be Evans? Oh no, Ulysses Bentley got it's just wherever Ulysses Bentley has been, he's shown up and scored touchdowns. Mm-hmm. So it's it's a narrow play. I'm by no means saying that we need to jam a 3K Ulysses Bentley into the lineups, but I think that there's a case to be made for him to see double-digit touches in this one, and if he's able to get into the end zone, he does allow you to spend up for those spend-up receivers that you were talking about. A little bit more of a main team-ish play, especially if we get news that Trey Harris is out. They looked quite a bit to Caden Lee in the LSU game, and if we don't have Trey Harris, or if Trey Harris is limited or going to give it a go, or any of those things that make you think he might not be 100%, I think a lot of that passing volume, when they do bother to pass against Oklahoma, will go to Caden Lee as it did previously. We still have Juice Wells in there. He didn't do anything against LSU. We still have Jordan Watkins, who's good for like 3 catches and 30 yards a game. None of those really excite me. Caden Lee has shown the upside, whereas the others haven't in multiple games. At the beginning of the season, had a little bit of a lull in conference play, and then turned it on last week against LSU. 9 catches for 132 yards, even though he didn't get the end zone. So I think Caden Lee is probably closer to a main team play, but definitely don't worry, or don't completely fade Bentley. Get him into some lineups, mix and match here and there. And so that's probably it for my exposure to this game. Don't really have any pieces that I feel good about on the Oklahoma side. They're all cheap, but not really any good. And everybody that is good is hurt, including the quarterbacks. So I don't know. What do you think? You gonna throw a dart on Jackson Arnold? Think he was gonna even play? What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, Jackson Arnold is we got away. Michael Hawkins had I don't know, he was projecting 15% ownership, and he hit it last week, and we were all kind of like, what's going on? Because it doesn't even seem like he's going to play the whole game even before that happened, and it didn't. They just have no receivers, no weapons. The running backs are awful. Gavin Sawchuk, I'm so shocked that Sawchuk hasn't just hit the portal now. Can't redshirt this year. I know he's injured, but man, it's been a disaster for this team. I actually really like the Bentley call there. They're pretty dinged up in the running back room. So even, if we get a full Parrish workload for 3 quarters, Rashad Amos isn't getting any work. So Bentley, he was at SMU before, back in, 2020, he was nearly 1,000-yard rusher. So he's got talent. I love the Caden Lee call. It's a pretty nice call out there. Trey Harris has been on their injury report several times the last few weeks. You know how they do, the coaching staff. They play games with the injury report, so I'll believe it when I see it. But the biggest takeaway for me is just a devastating end of the career for Juice Wells, who looked like he might be one of the best collegiate receivers of all time in his freshman season, and it just hasn't panned out for him. But injuries we'll pay attention to. Like the Bentley call, I need some value. I don't want to use Marcus Carroll very much, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So I'm on the Bentley train, I think, a little bit. Might end up with him depending on what the Harris news is. If Harris is out, especially, I think it puts me there a little bit more because they'll probably run a lot.
Yep.
All right, so moving on, we got Washington, the Huskies versus Indiana, total of 53.5. Indiana, 6.5 point favorites here at home. I got a issue with one of my ports on my computer, so my camera may or may not go out, but the important part is my mic is good, so apologize for any trouble I had there. Anyways, there are injuries to talk about here. Curtis Rourke, he underwent thumb surgery, so he will not play for this one. They're looking to get him back for the Michigan State game. That means Taven Jackson will get the start at quarterback. He happens to be, if you don't know already, the brother to Trace Jackson Davis, formerly of the Indiana Hoosiers basketball team. Now plays for your Golden State Warriors, I think. I don't follow the NBA too much, but he has athletic talent in his family. Came into the last game there when Rourke went down 7 of 8 for 35 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also rushed for 21 yards. Now, this Indiana offense under Curt Cignetti has just been absolutely unbelievable. I don't think anyone believes that Cignetti is going to be at Indiana for very long because he has done some really big things turning that program around, turned JMU into a winner, and his offense is just masterful. But I don't know that Taven Jackson has the ability to kind of operate and execute it the way that Curtis Rourke does. So I think we'll see a simplified version where Jackson throws a lot more short yardage stuff and uses his legs as opposed to trying to, throw the deep ball like we saw from Rourke. The other thing is that the Husky secondary is much better against the deep ball. They're more susceptible, kind of like Iowa, to shorter route stuff for tight ends and slot. And also they're pretty horrible against the run. So I'm not looking at Taven Jackson at 6'6" as a play, but I do think there's some sneaky looks here for a guy like a Justice Ellison, who is priced pretty cheap at 5'5". And I think a lot of people will look the other way because he is technically in a committee with the JMU transfers there, Kalen Black and Tyson Lawton, both who are healthy finally. But I think Ellison might push towards that 15 to 20 touch mark. As far as like the 1A to 1B to 1C thing, he's definitely the 1A. And reading back in some of the reports and interviews and pressers this week, it does sound like they're going to lean on him a little bit heavier. And he only needed 9 carries to rush for 105 yards against a very good Nebraska defense, which might not be very good anymore. 70 yards on 14 carries against Northwestern, another team that slows it down and plays pretty good defense. So he's just, the main thing is a touchdown machine. The 5.5 price point is relatively cheap considering what I expect him to do. I think he is going to push towards 20 fantasy points, and I think he scores twice. So maybe we get some anytime touchdown props in here for Justice Ellison. But I think he'll have his highest carries of the season. So that's somebody to me that's a little bit of a sneakier look. You do have Black at near min price at 3.3. Not enough work to really use him, and Tyson Lawton. But I think Indiana's plan is going to be to run the football a lot here and kind of protect Taven Jackson. That does make last week's kind of chalky darling Elijah Surratt unplayable for me. Maybe not unplayable, but very low on the priority list there at 5.7. We almost got away with the fade last week, but he got a late touchdown that pushed him towards like 15 to 16 fantasy points. So kind of hurt there, but overall at almost 6K against that Huskies defense, I'm not feeling him too much. I don't mind if you look towards maybe an Omar Cooper at 3.8, but the play to really probably beat the Huskies is going to be the tight end Zach Horton, who's priced there at 3.4. Not a lot of upside. Touchdown in his future, perhaps, but somebody like 4 for 40. I think he sees a fair amount of work there from Taven Jackson as the baby blanket. And then rolling back to the running backs, I think we see Ellison also kind of factor in as a pass catcher. Now, in the past, in the JMU offense, we saw their running backs last year, catch a lot of balls, Tyson Lawton especially. So perhaps in GBP, it makes more sense to use Lawton because he's the better receiver out of the group. And I do think that the Huskies are going to give up a lot of short yardage stuff, and PPR points is going to be very, very high in this game. So that's what I'm looking at on the Indiana side. When it comes to the Huskies, I'm actually, it's weird because I'm a little bit indifferent in that if we lose, I'm not that upset about it. Like last year, I was real upset, right? But I'm kind of in this like focused on the future mode with them. I don't want to see Will Rogers anymore. He's priced at 5.6. If this was like the heyday at Mississippi State for him, like that would be a must play price. We'd be like, oh my God, I got to get Will Rogers going to throw 50 times, but not in that same type of offense. He's been fairly subpar. Like he's done okay, but when it comes to fantasy purposes, he's just not really that guy anymore. And I really want to see the freshman that we have in Damon Williams, who is going to be an absolute stud next year. I am very excited for everybody to kind of get a chance to see more of him. And I'm almost to the point here, depending on how this game goes, if we're not looking like a New Year's Bowl, which I doubt is going to happen, we should really kind of turn the page, I think, let Will Rogers get paid and just kind of chill, So with that being said, not looking at the passing game of the Huskies really at all. I got my guy, Denzel Boston, who I was early on last year. He's very expensive. It's going to be hard to get him. 58 targets on the year, 9 touchdowns. He's been an absolute touchdown machine. You do have Giles Jackson there, also with 58 targets, cheaper than Boston, but pretty much of a low-end play. If you do want somebody from the Husky side that's a receiver, I think the tight end Kaleki Latu, who's very cheap, he's been seeing an upgrade in targets lately. Now has 24 catches for 215 yards and 28 targets. He's, you could do worse for a value play. And then Jonah Coleman, who, we used a lot last year, the beginning of this season, but he hasn't really been talked about much on any of the Husky slates. I think he's going to be in line for a lot of touches here. The best way for the Huskies to beat Indiana, even without Rourke, and keep that high-powered offense off the field is to run the football, and they need to run very, very well, right? So I think we're talking about a Coleman game where he probably gets close to 25 carries. He does have almost 700 yards on the season, which might surprise people because, again, not really getting talked about. 5 touchdowns, also 16 catches for 124 yards. So if ever there was a game to go back to Jonah Coleman, this could be it. He is priced at 6'3". It's a weird range where there's a lot of top-end premier options to pay up for and a couple of cheapies that we can look at. But I don't know that a lot of people are going to go to that mid-range level here at running back. So it does tell me that Coleman's probably like a sub 5% play. And you could very easily put up, 19 to 20 here, even in a loss. We do have another youngster that I it's not time for him yet, but Adam Muhammad, who's there at 3K. Like, the future of the team is going to be Damon Williams, Adam Muhammad, and Denzel Boston. And like, I'm not the only one in the Husky fan base that wants those three to just get the rest of the work the rest of the season. But yeah, it's a little bit of a weird game. I haven't decided yet if Ellison will make the main lineup, but I'm definitely looking at him quite a bit. Maybe Tyson Lawson for some GPP range, but it is painful to have the Huskies on the slate and really not that interested. Whereas last year, every game, it was like, hey, we got to get this stack in because this is the team. But yep, that's my spiel there on my Huskies. Just kind of reserved and focused on next season already, which you. Not trying to dog you or anything, but you're probably used to as a USC fan lately. So, yeah. What, do you have anything you want to add to that one, or should we move on?
Yeah, man. Been a tough first year in the Big Ten. Who could have seen that coming for you?
Yes, for sure. For sure. I'm not a big fan of the coach that we have either, but that's a story for another day. All right. And he'll probably leave for Florida. Who knows? All right. So let's move on to Nebraska versus Ohio State. This is the game I'm actually really excited about. Ohio State 25.5-point favorites, which is really crazy considering what Nebraska, people getting hyped about them and how good they played earlier in the season. A total of 48.5, which I don't know. I think the over's in play. I think Ohio State's putting a hammer at like 40, 50 points on their own. Just depends on what we think Nebraska can do. But it's happened later this year. But the classic Nebraska bottom out Matt Rule, devastation has begun for Nebraska, and it's going to be what I think real bad here. For what it's worth, the other pay up receiver that I love this week is Jeremiah Smith. So take it away. What do you got?
Yeah, so definitely like a lot of pieces on the Ohio State side here. I think this is very much a narrative game for them. Tough loss at Oregon, and Will Howard doing his best Dak Prescott impression, forgetting how much time was on the clock. Yeah. Didn't really help. Wasn't a great look. Had a bye week to think about it. And so it really comes down to how you think that Ohio State and Ryan Day are going to, not get back into the playoff because they're still in the playoff, but get their get some respect back on their name, if you will. And the way that Ohio State likes to do that is throw the ball. It's bludgeon people with the run during conference play. When you have to and you have to grind out a win, but when you want to be sexy and put up big numbers and impressive highlights and get on SportsCenter, they like to throw the ball, and they've got the playmakers to do that. So the other thing that I'll mention, Quinshon Judkins had hand surgery during the bye week casually. And so, he's not expected to miss this one. He is supposed to play. But if I'm Ryan Day and I have Penn State, next week, am I going to run Judkins out there for 20 touches? Am I going to run him between the tackles a whole bunch? Why? What would be the point of that, right? So I do think that there is a case to be made for some Travion Henderson. We haven't seen him get the kind of volume that we saw him get even in his freshman year. We've seen more of a split that's favoring Judkins so far this year, and Henderson's explosive. I think people kind of forget how explosive he was as a freshman because it's always been a backfield that he has shared with Mayan Williams and now with Judkins, but he can break a 50-yard run pretty easily. And I think that he will probably see closer to 15 to 18 touches as opposed to the 10 to 12 that he's been seeing. And it's a pretty large discrepancy between him and Judkins in price. I think those prices should be flipped for the expected usage in this one. And I will happily take advantage of a Henderson 6K price. That is not to say that the receivers aren't also in play. And I mean, Jeremiah Smith is fantastic. I like Igbuka almost as much. They're both really good plays here, and if both of the receivers are good plays, well, you got to think about the quarterback. And I've been down on Will Howard, kind of always, but in a game like this with a narrative that is going to lead to, well, we might have 40 points, but wouldn't it be nice if we had 50? I think you can get to Will Howard. I'm not going to force him into lineups, but if you're going to use both Ohio State wide receivers, you kind of have to use Howard. So he's also got 5 rushing touchdowns on the season. So he's not by any means like Mr. Athletic quarterback, but he is kind of starting to pull it near the goal line. And they run some deception too, because everyone is so focused on Judkins or Henderson, whoever is at the goal line when they're inside the 5, that they'll run plays that look like very obvious handoffs, and it'll be Howard that just kind of keeps it and walks into the end zone. So there's upside to that, especially when there's so many playmakers in this offense. So definitely in on Henderson and the 2 receivers, like Buka and Smith. Moderately in on Howard. I don't think we need to get to stuff like Carnell Tate or Brandon Innes even. Like to see more guys get involved in the Ohio State passing game, but it's really those 2 guys for the most part. On the Nebraska side, I can't touch it, man. The Ohio State defense is too good. It's going to be too upset. And the Nebraska offense, it was just miserable against an Indiana defense that, while good, I don't think is as good as Ohio State. And certainly Ohio State has all the motivation in the world here. So I don't think I can do anything there. And that takes a little bit of the wind out of the sails for the Ohio State offense, because they're not going to be ping-ponging back and forth as much as you would hope. But I also think they're going to keep the foot on the gas well into the third, if not, midway through the fourth quarter, regardless of the score. So a lot of Ohio State interest here. Spread it out if you want to, stack them all up if you want to. Really no way to go wrong, other than I would be a little bit careful with Judkins, just because I don't see him being a guy they need to, give a ton of volume to. Another shout while we're at it. We had seen the pricing on James Peoples be a little bit elevated early in the season in the 5K range. He's all the way down at 3.5 now. If we are correct about Judkins not getting a ton of volume and they don't, give 25 touches to Henderson, we might see 10 touches for James Peoples if the game is, truly out of hand, like 60-7 in the third quarter or something. And that could be plenty of time for James Peoples to, get to 80 yards and a score, which at 3.5 does some work. So kind of similar to the Bentley play. If for whatever reason Judkins gets ruled out, I would have a lot more interest in Peoples, because they're not going to give every single touch to Henderson. So just another name to watch there.
Yeah, the Ohio State spot's nice, because I think, there's these other shootout games on the slate, and I think people will look at it and be like, oh, Nebraska's falling apart. Ohio State's going to blow them out. Like, there's not going to be a lot. But Ohio State's just, they're one of those teams that, yes, while they're going to blow them out, you had mentioned in the third quarter, possibly early fourth, like by the time they get pulled, they'll have already scored, 40 plus. We might have a couple of touchdowns for Smith, maybe Ogbuka, Henderson, like all those guys will have already put up those stats. And we always do this with Ohio State, but at short timers memories, everyone forgets. And then you end up having no Ohio State game blows out. Yeah, like you thought, but then 3 of them are basically optimal if you had them, because they put up 30 plus. So Yeah, I'm really high on at least one of the receivers. Like Buka's been just as good. We had him in that Iowa game for the DVP spot. Like I just feel like you got to have somebody from this team. And I don't see how people are going to go here with the rest of the field and how I expect the industry to build. So not only do we have them bouncing back narrative, but also Kyle McCord. He threw 3 pick sixes tonight in the first half, 5 interceptions in total. There was a lot of chatter, and of course, the coach from Syracuse, thanks for Kyle McCord and all this. It'd be nice for Howard to be like, hey, I don't throw pick sixes, I throw it to my actual team, and some added stuff there for him to possibly build off of there. We love narratives on the Super Show, but yeah.
You mean Kyle McCord was fraudulent? Who would have thought?
That was brutal to watch, man. I've never seen anyone. I don't know if that's never happened before, but I have never seen that with my own eyes. 3 pick sixes in the first half. It was like a train wreck that you just could not stop watching. I wanted to see a fourth, honestly. Anyways, let's move on to the next game here. Missouri versus Alabama. Total of 53. Bama 13.5-point favorites. Heading into the season, I was liking Missouri. I thought they would be a threat to make the playoff, but in true Missouri fashion, they kind of bottomed out as well, and injuries have reared their ugly head. Brady Cook is now doubtful. Seems very, very unlikely he'll play, and Nate Noel has already been ruled out. So that leaves what I believe to be a pretty popular Marcus Carroll at 4K. However, without Brady Cook, that means Drew Pine is going to start, and Drew Pine is the type of quarterback that I could see throwing a pick six on Saturday, maybe multiple. Really worried about this Missouri offense having any ability to move the ball. And while you look at Carroll and say, okay, he's 4K, 20 plus carries, this is lock and load, 70% owned. How could you not have him? I think Bama just loads up against the run and says, okay, let's make Drew Pine beat us. He's not going to. So I think it's going to be very difficult for Carroll to find any lanes. The part that worries me about a potential fade is he's probably going to get a ton of dump offs, and those will add up quickly, regardless if they go for yardage or not. If he gets 5, 6, 7 receptions, the fade might not be looking as good there, but I'm not that worried about him on the ground. I don't, could be totally wrong, but I don't see him rushing for 100 plus here against this Bama team. If Brady Cook was playing, I might feel differently. But if you guys haven't seen Drew Pine play football, there's nothing that's going to scare you about that one, regardless of how poor Alabama's looked over the last couple of weeks, which takes Luther Burden out of the play. 7-5, we can't go there. I really liked him last week. Didn't end up getting him in my main build, but I thought he'd have a nice game against Auburn. But the second Cook went down with injury, dead on arrival. Pine couldn't get in the ball. He couldn't get open. It was just a horrible experience. So I can't see myself using any of the Missouri side. And I don't want to play Carroll just because everyone else does. So that's going to be kind of like the main decision point for me of the slate. Can Bentley, who you brought up, maybe even Peoples, like that would be great leverage to me over somebody like Carroll. On the Bama side, I'm not paying up for Jalen Milroe at 10-3. I think he has a nice game here. Bama in a similar situation, like, the public is down on them. The ESPN talking heads are down on them. I think it's a nice GPP look, like maybe an Alabama stack here where they kind of, try to steamroll Missouri. Overall, I think it turns out to be a pretty ugly game where Missouri probably scores like less than 10 and Alabama gets to, 21-24 and we go home. So I'm not really huge on him. Jan Miller and Justice Haynes, I think there's some anytime touchdown upside there, but they're not DFS plays anytime soon. And then you have our guy, Ryan Williams, 51 targets on the season, 31 catches, 650 yards, and 7 touchdowns. He's always a nice GPP look now at his price. Jeremy Bernard was mega chalky last week. We knew that would be the case. He's now second on the team with 37 targets. He is priced pretty cheap again at 4.2K. But we have all this other value. So I think his ownership dips down, where it's got to like 35% last Saturday. And he did have 5 catches for 72 yards. You didn't get killed if you faded him, which a lot of us did. But he's not really a value play that I'm placing any priority on. And this game in general is mostly an ignore, other than I think betting the Bama spread makes a lot of sense. But they have looked so undisciplined the last 3 weeks that I think betting on them just might not even be the move either. And with Williams priced at 7-1, he becomes more of a luxury play than a priority. And I'd much rather just play Egbuka, who you like, or Jeremiah Smith, who I like, and of course DT Sheffield, who everybody likes. So the main takeaway from this game is, if you follow what I believe to be very popular Marcus Carroll, or try to plant your flag in the sand and hope that you can, get away with him scoring 10 or less points. Because if that's the case, I think he'll be ahead of a lot of people in the big GPPs especially. So do you have a take on Carroll and, Missouri's offense potentially being led by Pine, or where would you be there expecting him? Let's say he's going to be 50% owned. What would you feel like your ownership would come in at?
Oh, I want zero Marcus Carroll. I want zero anything Missouri. Being led by Drew Pine is enough. Going up against Alabama is enough. Both of them at the same time? No, thank you.
All right. I wasn't sure. I was thinking you'd be in alignment with me, and I've talked to a few people like, hey, this doesn't seem right. Like, this seems bad, right? And most people have agreed. So maybe he won't get that high after all, but I kind of hope he does. All right, moving on, we're going to go to BYU versus UCF. It's a total of 55.5, and UCF home favorite of 2.5. Already getting people in the Discord asking, why is BYU not favored? Because we've made a lot of window trips on BYU this year. Is this a spot we can do so again? And what do you make of this game?
Well, so first you're going to have to tell me what the hell happened in the Iowa State game. I was on a boat off of the coast of Oahu, and I didn't get to watch any of that. I came back and UCF put up 35 points against Iowa State, and Rocco Becht ran the ball 20 times, and Iowa State still hasn't decided on a running back. Maybe quarterback the running back. I don't know how UCF kept that game remotely competitive, and it is the only thing that gives me pause of putting the 401k into BYU money line, because I think BYU is just going undefeated. Like, they are the team of destiny. Jewish quarterback at a Mormon school. It's just like it has Kumbaya written all over it. And Central Florida, like, that's who you think is going to beat this team? No chance. Yeah. When it comes to play on the field, I mean, like, look, RJ Harvey is fantastic and can make any offense look good, but this UCF offense is not good. I mean, they decided to not start KJ Jefferson anymore, and then they put in Ja'Cory Brown because the guy they put in before him was terrible, and Ja'Cory Brown is kind of just also another running back, and that can work against undisciplined teams. But who is more disciplined than BYU? They're not even allowed to drink. So how is this going to work out? How is UCF going to score points? Like, are BYU linebackers all of a sudden going to, like, stop maintaining their gap control because they're playing UCF? I don't get it. I do get LJ. I want. Let's put it this way: as much as I did not want Marcus Carroll, I want all the LJ Martin. Like, Iowa State didn't decide on a running back; they didn't have to. Carson Hansen still went crazy. LJ Martin is, I think, the dude, right? Like, Hinckley Rapaldi will still get his touches, and they like to get Moa involved here and there, but ever since he's been back, it's been the LJ Martin show. 20 for 120 and 2, and then some passing game work in the previous game. I think LJ Martin might be one of my favorite plays on the slate, and at that 6.2 price point, it's not a massive discount like you're getting with Bentley, or as some people would think with Carroll, but it's a discount relative to what I expect him to do, which is put up RJ Harvey numbers, 150 plus and 2 touchdowns. I think that's well within the realm of expectation. And I think that BYU controls the line of scrimmage well enough for him to do that. I don't, and this isn't because I don't think Retzlaff is short on talent. He's not, he's not the guy that's going to choose to run it 20 times, although Rocco Beck typically isn't either, and he just did. So who knows? Maybe Retzlaff will see his rushing numbers bump up against a possibly undisciplined UCF team. But it's such a contrast in styles in this one. I think Retzlaff is in play. I don't know that I'm forcing him in as much as I am with Martin. If you do use Retzlaff, the targets are a little bit more condensed at BYU this year. It's pretty much Lassiter and Roberts as opposed to like 8 guys who, 3 of them you can't pronounce their name. We actually kind of know who's going to be getting the ball. And then, Parker Kingston has done some weird stuff at times this year, but he's not really reliable. And Keelan Marion, he showed up kind of last week, I guess, with one long touchdown. But I think it's really just Lassiter or Roberts that I would have major interest in. And for me, I'm probably going to say Lassiter is the move. So if you play Retzlaff and want to pair, I would probably pair him with Lassiter. I would see the case for Roberts. If you wanted to get all 3 and get LJ Martin in there with those 2, I don't mind that either, because I think, the BYU offense is going to be very productive here. And, in terms of the run back, I actually don't really want to get to Harvey. I think 9.2 is a lot to pay. Like, you're going to have to get essentially 202 for that 9.2 to really be paid off and be necessary. And I think BYU knows what this offense is that they're going to be facing, and should have a decent opportunity to shut it down. That said, they knew who Ollie Gordon was, and they weren't really able to stop him. And most teams have been able to stop Ollie Gordon, or at least limit him, so far this season. So I understand why you would want to get to an RJ Harvey. He's been absolutely excellent. I'm not going to prioritize it. I like the individual pieces, in particular LJ Martin, better on the BYU side.
Yeah, Harvey's price is really restrictive, and I'm a little gun shy with him because I had him in that Cincy game. That Cincy game didn't turn out any way that I wanted it to. 3 straight games under 100 yards. Then he broke out against Iowa State of all teams. Like, it's probably a decent GDP look, but I don't see him getting a lot of ownership. So even if he does bust out, I don't think you're dead to rights. But yeah, LJ Martin is like a SuperShow staple. Like, we all love that guy. The BYU running back situation got a little murky there with Martin hurt, but now that he's back, like, he's the guy. I love that we got him against Arizona. That was a weekday slate, wasn't it? The Oklahoma State slate was the weekday slate. We had him the week before against Arizona, like low rostership. And then, of course, Oklahoma State, the matchup for running backs. He does his job. I don't think he's going to be this priced, under 7K again after this. So I'm all there, and got to say, Lassiter, man, he has been really, really good. I didn't expect him to be this good. So shout out to him. But yeah, I think BYU keeps it going. This one may be a little bit closer than we want it to be, but that's just better for Martin. All right, moving on to the next one here. We have Texas Tech versus TCU, another game that, has shootout written all over it. But I wonder if the ownership for this game might be a little on the lower side because of all the attention on, North Texas. It is a 6.5-point spread in favor of TCU, total of 66.5. So those are the 2 games, this one and North Texas, that I would expect a lot of people to be involved with. Starting on the Tech side, you have Baron Morton, who's, a solid passer. If nothing else, high volume, 50-plus throws in this game would not surprise me one bit. He has attempted 40-plus in 4 of his 7. Not a priority play by any means. I think it's more of if you're going to game stack this, you can get to Morton. 7.4 is an intriguing price for him. But even if he does blow up, we're probably looking at like a mid-20s. He has shown the upside to hit 30. Oddly enough, he played North Texas in week 3 and did have 32. So he's a good GBP look. The decision would be, like you said, RJ Harvey, expensive, a luxury play. But then you have Taj Brooks, who we absolutely love. Going into last week, he was chalk. We all loved him. And it was considered, like, a lot of people were saying, like, oh, he had a down game. And then you look at it, it's like, well, any down game for a guy that's 27 fantasy points, like, Jesus, how could I ever fade him? 804 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns. Like, he's a luxury play for sure. And he's the kind, like, if you're able to get there, like maybe you don't start, but then you get a value play in because of injury news. And you're like, oh, all of a sudden I have this money for Brooks. I wasn't expecting that, but now I'm getting there. And you know what? I'm feeling pretty happy about that. Like, the bust potential for Taj Brooks just is very, very low. And especially in a game against TCU, like I don't think he puts up less than 20 fantasy points very often in a matchup like this. We want to get him closer to 30 at this 8-8 price. And again, we may not be able to get there because of the price point of some of the other guys we're looking to, but I'm certainly not ignoring him fully. And as we get to the afternoon slate with those back half games, like, I'll make sure I get Brooks somewhere, right? As far as the receivers go, there's really 3 to look at. Last week, it was the Caleb Douglas show, 9 catches for 99 yards and 3 touchdowns. Coy Eakin has kind of fallen by the wayside. He's the clear WR3 right now, but he does lead the team in receiving touchdowns with 5. But a lot of that came earlier in the season. The emergence of Douglas is hurting him. And then you have Josh Kelly, who leads the team in targets with 70. He's the top price option at 6-8 and the guy that you can definitely count on the most. Like, he's going to give you a solid score. Last week, I had him against that Baylor team. That ended up being the game you had to stack fully. But 9 catches for 76 yards, again, might have been looked at as a down game because of what Douglas did, but that was still 19 fantasy points to the top. Like, you'll take that all day at 6-8. I do think we see a little bit of everybody running over to Caleb Douglas in a way. He has had back-to-back games of 19 plus DK points. The week before that, 5 for 116. So no reason to think that can't continue in this matchup, but that's one of those kind of fragile plays in my mind that, yes, everyone jumps over there from Jeremy Bernard to Douglas after what he did, and suddenly he gives you that 2 for 24. So I'm probably underweight to what I expect Douglas to be, but he's obviously in play. And then you have the tight end Jalen Conyers, who's just not turning out at all in this offense. Keeps looking at him at 3.2 and 3K and thinking, man, he should be really good, but it's just not working. On the TCU side, you have Hoover at 8.5 in a matchup against Texas Tech that is absolutely wonderful. Sawyer Robertson just looked like the Heisman himself in this matchup against Texas Tech, as a lot of quarterbacks do. Hoover has looked mortal in the past couple of games, so I think people will be down on him and maybe overlook him to a degree. The 2 teams that have made him look that way, oddly enough, one was Houston, which just completely confused him, and then Utah, which they did eke out that win, but he couldn't do anything against Utah. Obviously a great matchup, over 2,200 passing yards, 16 touchdowns with 6 interceptions. I would assume for him to throw 35 to 40 times. They do need to get their running game going, though. And there has been chatter about the freshman who's the backup quarterback, Haas Haney. That's how you pronounce that one. That's going to be a fun one next year. He's been getting work on designed runs, but they want to start using him potentially as a passer in certain situations. So that is the only thing that makes me feel like Hoover's more of a GPP look and not a main team, because if he does come out and throw 2 interceptions, I do have a feeling we could see Haney in a little bit more of a defined role there as the backup. Running back has been a tough one for TCU. Cam Cook stepping in as the next great TCU running back and getting the volume, but he's not turning that into much. And the coaching staff, specifically the head coach, Sonny Dykes, has kind of basically said nobody sees this RB1 job, certainly not Cook. We need to look to Trent Battle more. We need to get Jeremy Payne back into things and find that RB1 spot. And he did make the comment that if anyone would be called RB1 right now, it would be Trent Battle. Battle is a converted quarterback wide receiver from this team. He wasn't particularly great last week either, but he did have more success from a yards per carry basis than Cam Cook. Had 10 touches in all. I believe it was 8 for 50 somewhere in there. And then we saw Jeremy Payne, who looked very good early in the season. Then they didn't use him at all. Then he got some touches last week, and he's starting to look pretty good too. He's the youngster. I believe he's a redshirt. No, he's a true freshman. Former 4-star, top 200 kid. So it's tough to sit here and say, like, hey, you got to use a TCU running back. Maybe that's the pivot from a Chalky or Carroll. If you're running multiple lineups, I think you would be wise to play a Payne or a Battle, because this is a great matchup against Texas Tech. I just couldn't sit here and say, like, yeah, it's definitely going to be Battle. It's going to definitely be Payne. I think they're all going to get touches, even Cook. But one thing I'm certain of is that Cam Cook won't be the optimal one to come out of this backfield. if anybody on TCU puts up, 10 plus fantasy points, I really don't think it will be him. My money would be on Battle, truthfully, but I think Jeremy Payne is a really interesting GPP look too. So I'm hoping for more clarity as we get up the next 36 hours, but pretty damning stuff from Sykes, at least regarding Cam Cook. The receiver side, Jack Besh is 8K. That's a luxury play I don't think I can get to. He's been great, but the last couple of games, because of Hoover's struggles, he hasn't been so good. He should be low owned. So if you're running a TCU game stack of sorts, I think you'll get him at, sub 5%. Obviously has slate breaking upside, 29 plus fantasy points in 4 different games this year. So can't write him off. You do have Savion Williams, the most versatile player. They gave him 7 carries last week. That's how dire things have gotten in the running game. But I watched the whole Dykes presser for whatever reason. I don't know. I just was watching it. He did say we cannot continue to use Savion Williams in this manner. So he doesn't want to give him 7 plus carries. He wants to use him as a receiver, not a running back. So if you see that and you get a little excited about Savion Williams, don't, because I don't think that's going to continue. Eric McAllister is playing the least amount of snaps of their core 4 receivers. I love Eric McAllister. I think he could be really good. But until those snaps raise to a more consistent level, can't use him. We learned that the hard way, 3 weeks ago when he bageled. And then the most playable option, I think, from the team that you could use in your main lineup is JP Richardson, who's still really cheap at 3.8K. If I wasn't planning to pay for 2 receivers this week, because I really just don't see how I don't play Sheffield and Smith. It's going to take a lot for me not to play 2 pay-up receivers, which is very different than what I normally do. But if I wasn't, I think JPR would be a guy that I would be close to all in on. Across the last 3 games, 18 total targets. He's looked like the best receiver on the field, 3 for 59 last week. He looked like he was going to have a monster 200-yard game last week before things fell apart. But 3.8K, I think we see him get steamed a little bit closer to lock on Saturday and probably be a 15 to 20% owned player by the time it's all said and done. So that's kind of where my head's at there. I think there's a real chance to win a GPP with a TCU running back. I just can't, unfortunately, give you that definitive answer on who it'll be just yet, but check in Saturday morning. Maybe I will have looked into the crystal ball and figured it out by then. Anything you want to add to this one?
All Caleb Douglas all the time, man.
All right,
like
yeah, he's a great price. All right, Illinois versus Oregon, 54.5 total. Oregon is 21-point favorites. Illinois is a scrappy squad. They did it to Michigan last week without their quarterback throwing for more than 80 yards, but they're going to have to do better than that against Oregon. What are we doing here? What happens? Who do you like?
We haven't had a good showstopper in a while. I'm going to go ahead and say Oregon Illinois wins this one outright. It's not something people are going to expect, but if you look at Oregon's season, they had the win against Ohio State. They rolled against Purdue. They could sleepwalk through that one. Illinois is fighting for a chance at relevancy. Took care of business against Michigan. It was a gritty win. Like, that is the very definition of that program. And there's more fight to Illinois than there is to Oregon right now because they've had to do it. They've had to put it all out there on the line, and they only have the one loss themselves. So a chance at relevancy, I would argue, if they beat Oregon at Oregon, a chance at being, a potential playoff team, especially if they, maintain just that one loss throughout the rest of the season somehow. This game defines Illinois' season. I don't think Oregon is looking at it that way. And when you have such a mismatch in motivation, crazy things can happen. We see it all the time in college football. That is why we love the sport. So it is a crazy thing to say that a 21-point underdog is going to win outright, but sometimes we have to say crazy things. So if you're looking at it from a betting perspective, you're probably getting pretty good money on that Illinois money line. From a DFS perspective, the only way that they're going to do that is to beat Oregon through the air. You're not going to run Oregon to death, and I don't think Illinois has the personnel in, a banged up Caden Fegan who's not going to play the rest of the season. They're going to mainly turn to Josh McCray, who, when given volume, can produce decently, but I'm not going to say that he's a Caleb Johnson by any means. And I don't think he's an RJ Harvey either. I think that he's a solid ancillary part of an offense. But I think the way that Illinois is going to get this one done is through the air. And Luke Altmaier is extremely inexpensive. At 5'7", I don't think anyone's going to play him. I really like the play. I mean, if you're looking to spend up elsewhere, maybe get all the pieces of that North Texas offense, or get Will Howard plus 2 receivers, and you need another cheap quarterback to make that all work. Luke Altmaier is very much in play, which is not something you're going to hear from me often, but I do believe in it here. Pat Bryant showed up in a big way against Purdue, a little bit more muted, as everyone was against Michigan, but we've seen some very big games out of him. Only over 100 yards twice, but 2 touchdowns 3 times. So gives him a total of 7 on the year. They know how to get him the ball in the red zone. And then Zachary Franklin, who we've seen be extremely successful. Was he a UTSA or a UTEP guy?
UTSA, part of that trio of monsters they had.
Yeah. So we've seen him be extremely successful at the lower level and somewhat productive here in an Illinois offense. And it's really just kind of going to be condensed between Altmaier, Bryant, and Franklin, which is an extremely inexpensive place to stack up a quarterback and 2 receivers. And you can use just about anybody you want on the Oregon side as a run back, because by no means am I saying Illinois is going to blow them out. Oregon's going to lay an egg. I'm not saying that. But I think it's going to be a competitive game throughout, which means Evan Stewart, who stepped up quite a bit more the last couple games, had that big game against Ohio State, 7 for 149 and a touchdown. We were on him as part of that one. And then Tez Johnson, obviously, is always going to be good for volume, albeit an expensive way to get there. And then in the running game, I mean, it's pretty much all Jordan James. They're not really involving Whittington as much as we've seen him be involved in. I guess in blowouts he's been involved, but if we're expecting this one to be competitive, we can't really get there. So then it becomes a question of, can you use Dylan Gabriel? At 9,300, he's one of the more expensive quarterbacks on the slate. Is he the most expensive? No, not quite. He's third most expensive. Yeah, Milroe is the most expensive on the slate. But he's up there, right? And so it becomes, okay, if we think this game stays competitive throughout, is it going to be a back and forth battle between Dylan Gabriel and Altmaier? I think that's a viable thing to do. I don't think that a lot of people will think to game stack this one, because they're just going to say, okay, it's going to be an Oregon blowout, and they'll turn it over to the second stringers in the third quarter, and all of our utility is gone. I think it would be extremely viable to game stack this one because there are such a good combination of pieces in the 2 quarterbacks, and then a cheap receiver from each team to use, along with an expensive receiver from each team to use. Like, it all fits together pretty well. And then, if you want to find your running backs elsewhere, if you want to plug in a Bentley in order to get to both expensive receivers, a lot of different ways to go about the roster construction. But I think, this is a very sneaky game to be involved in, and will have low ownership kind of throughout, especially on the Illinois side. And I think, there'll be fireworks in this one. If you want a final call in terms of what the prediction will be, I'm going to say this one ends up 34-31. Illinois takes it.
Yeah, man. $100 bet on Illinois money line right now gives you $1,000 profit. So hey. And it's funny, we're going to be known as like the Luke Altmaier fan club here soon, because last week when you were doing your thing in Hawaii, I laid down the gauntlet. I loved Luke Altmaier last week. at 18, it wasn't great. It wasn't horrible, but I really like Altmaier. And I wasn't thinking about him against Oregon, but Oregon's defense has looked pretty suspect. Maybe I was a week too early on Altmaier, so I love it because it's 2 weeks in a row. One of us has been on Altmaier, so we'll see how it turns out. And yeah, Zachary Franklin, man, like in 2021, UTSA, they had Josh Cephas, DeCorian Clark. Respect to him. He got hurt. His football career is over now. And Zachary Franklin, like that was a fun ass team. So we know Franklin can pan out. And if they're going to score 34 points, 30 plus, like Franklin's probably going to do something. So I really like that Altmaier play. I need to get exposure now because he did okay for me last week, but not quite what I wanted. All right, moving on here, we've got Maryland versus Minnesota, total of 46.5. The Gophers are 4.5-point favorite. Now, last time Maryland was on the slate, it was a very chalky Billy Edwards, and he did have a nice game against USC, 33 fantasy points, 39 of 50 pass attempts, so 50 attempts, 39 completions, very solid, 373 yards. He also scored 3 total touchdowns, 2 through the air, 1 on the ground. It's amazing what having a fully healthy Ty Felton and Caden Prather can do for a quarterback. Don't suspect that we'll see much ownership on Edwards this week. Certainly think he's fine as like a GPP look because I don't care what the matchup on paper states. Felton and Prather are going to do their thing, and they're going to get the ball from Billy Edwards. As far as the running game goes, Minnesota's pretty susceptible. This is a developing DVP spot, but I don't think we can really trust anyone in the Maryland running back room. Certainly not Hemby. Hemby, he did score a touchdown last week, and he also caught 6 passes for 52 yards. So you might look at that and be like, hey, maybe something's there. But Nolan Ray got, I believe it was the most carries he's had all season. So he did break in there and cut back on Hemby's rushing upside. Lucky for him, he was efficient with the touchdown and the receptions, but I don't know if you can count on that for Hemby. So pretty leery of either of those guys, even though, again, it's a DVP spot. Maybe I'll look at some props there for Hemby later. And then as far as the receivers go, Ty Felton, he's expensive, but geez, you were the one that pointed him out earlier in the season, and he's been fantastic since. Even hurt, the guy's making plays. 88 targets. It's going to be the first one of the Big Ten, I think, to hit the 100 targets threshold. 64 catches, 800 yards, and 6 touchdowns. But his, the attention the defense paying to him, Prather kind of sleptwalked through the first quarter of the season. We thought, watch out, because this guy's good. Now he's playing extremely well. He's been targeted 61 times, 43 catches, 457 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Especially lately, Prather's been a really nice look. And you look at the prices, like 8.8 for Felton. It's a big price. If you can't get there, taking Prather is definitely a suitable option because he's over 3K cheaper at 5.2. And yeah, he's not going to deliver a 25 to 30 very often like Felton, but you're going to get somewhere between 15 to 20. And at 5.2, you're doing somersaults for that type of score. His volume, especially lately, has been huge. And you saw 9 catches for 111 yards against USC. I think it's only forward here for him, not backwards. So if you want to keep rolling him out, I think you can definitely do so. On the Minnesota side, I like these cheap quarterbacks this week. Altmaier's definitely in that range, but you have another near min price option here in Max Brosmer. And during the offseason and the transfer portal and stuff, Brosmer got a ton of hype. He's a real good passer. Going to a Minnesota team, I didn't really expect him to be much of a fantasy champion by any means, and he's been okay. But we did see against USC, common theme here. He threw for, 169 yards, whatever, but he rushed 3 times, scored 3 times on the ground, put up 26 fantasy points. And he's been throwing the ball pretty well lately. 250 yards against Michigan, over 200 against Iowa, 200 against UCLA. He's been pretty good. And at 5K, you don't necessarily need him to put up 30 to pay off. 15 to 20 would do it. All these sub 6K quarterbacks that I like, and he's definitely there. The nice thing is that Maryland's defense is giving up almost 270 yards per game through the air. So their secondary is very beatable. They're better on the ground, but there are teams consistently beating them through the air. Nick Marsh for Michigan State had his breakout game, 200 yards receiving, something like that, against this same Maryland team. I do think Darius Taylor is a little bit sneaky as he's expensive at 8K. Harvey, can we get there? Maybe not. Brooks, can we get there? Maybe not. For me, I got to play Mekhi Hughes. Where does that leave Darius Taylor? Probably sub 15%. I just don't think people are going to have the salary to get to him. And this is not a game that necessarily has shootout written all over it, but I do think it's in play to hit the over. Taylor, running wise, 432 yards. He's missed a couple of games, but great YPC, has 6 touchdowns, but he has a lot of value as a receiver as well. 29 catches for 223 yards, 3 touchdowns, second most targets on the team at 34. Like there's one of those like Desmond Reed specials growing here where I think that maybe Taylor hits 50 to 60 yards, maybe he scores on the ground. But I think you see him, like 5 for 100. Like, I don't know. Something tells me that we're going to see a big Darius Taylor receiving game here. And he's definitely shown that upside throughout. And this is a spot where Brosmer can get some easy, dump offs to Taylor. He had the 10 catches against Michigan State, 52 yards, 5 for 56 against USC, 5 for 37 against Nevada, like 4 for 48 against Rhode Island. This is definitely a guy who is going to contribute in that regard. And it's still a relatively cheap price considering that he could be one of the highest scorers at the position this week from his receiving, not his rushing there at 8K. So think maybe like Desmond Reed. Daniel Jackson leads the team in targets with 61, a Minnesota receiver with 61 targets. Not something we've seen a lot lately, not since the days of Rashad Bateman. 42 catches, 451 yards, 1 touchdown. He had 10 for 89 last game. Definitely a guy you can look to if you want like a GPP afternoon stack for Minnesota. Jackson with Brosmer. 1% owned, could do some things. Elijah Spencer has been playing much better this year. It was non-existent last year after transferring over from Charlotte. He was a 1,000-yard receiver in Charlotte in 2022. People forget very fast. 22 catches, 255 yards, and a touchdown on 29 targets. He's not really a play because of how cheap Jackson is there at 4.5. So you get Spencer at 3.8 if you're kind of doing like I don't know if there's a showdown slate for this one, but he would be a really good like showdown type of play. But I really like this Minnesota side. I think that they do cover, they do win outright, and I think that we see Taylor have just an absolute monster game at low rostership. And I wouldn't sleep on Max Brosmer for possibly putting up 20 here against Maryland. I think most of the ownership goes to Prather and a little bit on Felton there as one of the premier pay-ups. But the Minnesota side's not getting the love that it probably deserves. So that's maybe my sneaky pick as it can be for a team that is favored by 4.5, but nobody is talking about them as a winner here in this game. Where do you at with Felton? We it's your guy talking about paying up for, a couple of mid-level running backs. Haven't really gotten an idea of maybe what you're doing with receiver. You like the Ohio State guys. Is Felton somebody you feel like you want to pay up for this week, or maybe too much of a luxury for what you want to do?
Yeah, but price is pretty tough. I also think that Minnesota kind of controls the game environment a little bit too much for my liking. If he was down in like the 6K range where he stayed for a while, it'd be a different conversation. But 8.8, you're expecting a lot from him, and I don't think they'll have the ball enough to do that.
That's fair. All right, moving on. We have Texas versus Vanderbilt. A total of 53. Texas fresh off a big fat L. 19-point favorites against, I don't know, can we call them America's team at this point, Vanderbilt? Because all they seem to do is knock off teams that they have no business beating. Might they have another upset in their pocket here? Another goalpost taken down to the river, perhaps. Texas, 19-point favorites. Injuries, too, to some key positions. What do we think?
Yeah, Vandy's ranked now. Holy cow! What world are we living in? It's wild. They're 25th, but they're still ranked. Interesting in this one. We got a quarterback controversy in Texas. They coming off a tough loss against a good team, but still a tough loss. Physical game, emotional. Probably got to be a downswing for Texas to lose that one and lose their whatever opportunity they had at being kind of the presumptive number 1 team in the country. And now they have to go play in Nashville, and it's going to be interesting to see how Texas responds. I do think Texas wins this one, but it's probably going to be a little bit closer than people might expect, and it may come down to the wire. And yes, they are going to be missing Bond, and that's a big thing. I mean, he for whoever's going to be playing quarterback, he's been kind of the glue and the go-to guy in that offense for the most part. They don't really have another reliable alpha receiver established. I guess the next man up would be Matthew Golden. He had a big game week 1 and hasn't really put up anything close to that since. I guess he was okay against Michigan as well. Did get in the end zone once there, but has not been consistent. And he will, we'll see. The good news is for Golden, he's only 3,800, so should be a lot of opportunity for him. I think the throwing to the backs that happened, what did Jaden Blue ended up with like 7 catches?
No carries too. Oddly enough, 0 carries.
Yeah, like that's a pretty weird stat line for a running back, right? Or at least a running back that isn't a service academy running back. So I don't know really what to make of that. I think that's mainly a function of, hey, that Georgia defense is scary and I got to get the ball out pretty quick. And this guy's standing pretty close to me and looks like he's open. I think is kind of what caused that. I don't think that happens again. I do think that, we see some volume from Jaden Blue. They've given a good amount of volume to Wisner as well. I don't know that I would call Wiseman the lead back at this point. I don't think that's true, even though he got 15 carries against Georgia to 0 for Blue. I think it's just very much a wide open committee to the point where I'm not really interested in any of them. I do think that there's one of them that will have a good game between Blue, Wisner, and Gibson. Probably it's going to be mainly Blue and Wisner, but it's kind of a coin flip. Maybe you go to Wisner because of the cheaper price, but it's not a real interesting place for me to go. I would rather see the production tallied up in a passing game where the guys are both cheaper and there's a little bit more explosiveness from the Texas receivers. So Golden, we've seen him be explosive in the past at Houston, and I think he's got that in him, and I think we will see that from him against a very beatable Vandy secondary. We've seen DeAndre Moore show up exactly once. I don't know that we can count on him. We've seen Grant Helm be a kind of reliable underneath security blanket type of target, especially in the Georgia game. 6 catches for 62 yards. Would like to see him be a little bit more explosive. We saw that in the Michigan game early on in the season, back when we thought that was a game between two of the country's better teams. Turns out, that was a heavily Texas favored kind of game. And we've seen Ryan Wingo have some downfield explosiveness, but has not caught more than three passes in any game other than the opener against Colorado State, which was a massive blowout, 52-0. So there's not really a guy that you can rely on for massive production out of the Texas passing game, but they're all priced that way, and that's okay. I think Golden is probably who I would lean to as my best bet for a Texas receiver. And then I don't want to mess with that quarterback situation. There's just too much weirdness going on. I mean, I guess it's yours, until we find out it's not yours. But there's just too much flippy floppy happening there. And Arch Manning presents too much of a threat for me to even mid game, for, Sark to say, hey, I didn't like that you did X, Y, or Z, and now Arch is coming in. You can't spend $8,700 on a quarterback and not know for sure that precluding injury he's going to play the whole game. So can't touch that. And whoever plays lost their best receiving option, so that's another reason not to touch that. Can't figure out the running back room, so I think we just go with Golden or Helm or whoever you think is the receiver that's going to get the most volume in this one with Bond out. and say that guy is going to have a pretty good game against a vulnerable Vandy secondary. On the Vandy side, are we going to mess with Diego Pavia at 7,200 against Texas? I mean, he's at home. Texas coming off an emotional loss. Diego Pavia is the giant killer this season, taking down Bama and Kentucky in consecutive weeks, making it a game against Missouri back when Missouri was good, beating Va Tech in the opener. I have to think about it a little bit, right? Like, he's got the exact kind of play style that we want to see from a guy like that. He's got a cheap pairing option in Stowers. What is Stowers, like 4-3 or something? 4-4?
He runs, man. He runs so well.
And yeah, he runs the ball, right? Like, he's got everything you want in a DFS quarterback. The only thing is Texas's defense is still good, right? Like, the Alabama game, they lost not because Alabama's offense couldn't keep up, but because the Alabama defense crumbled. Vandy did well against Kentucky, but only put up 20 points against Kentucky. Texas, I think, has a better defense than both. And so I think it is a bit of a reach to get to Pavia, even though, like, my heart wants me to. I don't think we can do that. I do think that Stowers is very much in play at 4-4. So yeah, I think cheap receivers, and I guess we'll give Cedric a shout. I don't think I want to get to a Vandy running back against the Texas defense, but Cedric at 4-4. He did put up 21 for 64 and 2 touchdowns against Bama, so it's not like he is overmatched against elite competition, but I think the Texas defense is going to be able to shut down the run pretty well. Even if that means, keying a little bit more on Pavia, I think they'll still be able to contain Cedric to a degree where there are other running backs I'd prefer to get to. So I would love to say that I'm all in on the Vandy side just for, like, the upset underdog aspect of it, but I think Stowers is the only piece I can really legitimately use to pair with Golden on the Texas side.
Yeah, and this is the best defense Vandy has faced for sure. I mean, say what you will about Bama and Kentucky and some Virginia Tech even, but this is certainly going to be a real test for them. I will say I won't doubt Pavia and this Vanderbilt team, but I also don't think you can really use too much DFS from this. And yeah, the quarterback controversy for Texas, like, it was always coming to this. Sark, like, the second that he started playing, like, he's going to play him in the second half of blowouts, like, that happens. But, like, it was just brewing for a quarterback controversy, and that was like minus 10 million to happen. So I'm not surprised about that. The running back room for Texas, we got away with fading two really chalky Jaden Blue slates. It just, Jarrett Gibson he's going through his freshman wall right now. Wisner is, like, the most reliable. You're right. Can't touch it. And then as far as the receivers go, I think you're right. Golden and Helm is not, like, as far as safety valves, Helm's like near min price. There's probably no upside there. Golden at least has the upside. But I don't even know if we can trust really anyone in our main lineup for this. At least they're cheap, sub 4K, like you said. Silas Bolden has been a disappointment. I do think Jonte Cook has a massive amount of upside. He's I believe he's the redshirt freshman. Probably can't use him. DeAndre Moore, same thing. But those guys have major upside. It won't surprise me if either of those two or Wingo catches a touchdown. But beyond, a one-off in GBP, I really don't know how this game's going to play out too well for DFS. So I'm probably going to stay away from it for the most part unless we get some more clarity on another situation. All right, finish up here with Oregon State versus Cal. 49 total. Cal is 10-point favorites against Oregon State. And it probably surprises nobody that's a regular watcher of this show, and certainly not Jake, to find out that I have a lot of interest in this game. And normally you've got the Cal side on lock. Oregon State has been very good to us the last few night slates for DFS purposes. And Giovanni McCoy is another one of those near min price quarterbacks that I have an affinity for this week. 238 yards last week 81 yards plus 2 touchdowns in that close loss to UNLV, completely broke it. 2-game late slate, you'd say, oh, he's probably going to be, majorly owned, but McCoy has had his struggles figuring it out. Oregon State's offense hasn't been that great. So he was like 50% owned on a 2-gamer, which was nice. But he's developing very quickly since like week 3 into like one of the better dual threat quarterbacks in the area. So 312 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, over 1,200 passing yards. He has just the 2 passing touchdowns, and he's been picked off 5 times, but 4 of those were in the game against Nevada when they had to go into catch-up mode, and he was throwing a lot. And this Oregon State team's at its best when they're running the football. So 4 of those 5 interceptions were in one game because of a game script. I have a lot of interest in him at 5K. He's dangerously close to being in my main lineup, and that could be a mistake, but this Cal defense does not scare me in a way that maybe it should. I think they've had some close calls. They've had some games that, maybe they should have won. The Miami game, say what you will. And I don't know if that broke their spirit. Close loss at Pittsburgh. And then, they had the home game against NC State, and the youngster CJ Bailey, he tore them up. 306 yards, 2 touchdowns. They did well against the run for sure, but Bailey was just, throwing wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted. And I feel like McCoy is just a very sneaky near min price look here. And then he has that rushing upside. So I don't know if I'm going to go there, but I'm really close. As far as the running back room, it's all Anthony Hankerson now. Jam Griffin is out long-term. Sounds like he might not be back again this season. Those 2 were splitting carries at the beginning of the year. Hankerson now getting absolutely fed. Might remember slightly different regimes, but Damian Martinez with this program and how well he ran. Now he's with Miami and he's like a non-factor. Hankerson is just really playing well. 700 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. A lot of people not paying attention to Oregon State or playing those late night slates probably don't know a lot about Hankerson, but he's definitely a worthwhile pay up if you want. 16 catches for 86 yards as well. I think this Oregon State team is, a little bit live to win, but definitely cover. Hankerson checking in at 7.7. It's a high price point, but his touchdown equity in this offense is just so high. When it comes to the receiver room, Trent Walker is somebody that I think could see some ownership spike. He's priced at 4.6. He's definitely, become the number 1 in this offense. He's been targeted 69 times now, 46 catches for 468 yards and a touchdown. Has been very, very reliable. And then we've seen some recent emergence because they needed a number 2. When it was Jam Griffin and Hankerson, they ran the ball every down, and when they threw it, it was to Walker. And the last 3 games, we've seen the emergence of the tight end, Jermaine Terry, 18 targets in the past 3 games, 11 catches for 174 yards. He's been good. And then Darius Clemens, 15 targets in the last 2 games alone, 10 catches for 110 yards. Again, neither of these 2 have done much this season, but they're making a point to get the ball to these guys more. 4 for 70 and a couple of carries for Clemens in that last game. So they're making that effort. And then Terry at 3.2 is a tight end. So naturally you think less upside, but he blocks well, but they're also putting him in a position to make plays. Had a 31-yard catch against Nevada, had a 27-yard catch against UNLV that got called back. And then he did finish with 3 for 38 there, 5 for 94 against Nevada. So a near min price option if you afternoon slate it and you want to get a pair for McCoy that's very cheap and not Walker. Terry is somebody that I think will continue, and reading reports there, that's something they want to make happen with Terry. And it makes their offense less one-dimensional as well. On the Cal side here, you got Fernando Mendoza. He's currently holding off Chandler Rogers for now. Did attempt 37 plus passes in each of the last 2 games. So there's volume there, and he's a cheap price, but upside doesn't seem to be there. Like even if he throws for 250 to 300, I'm not sure he'll be over 15 fantasy points even. So I couldn't use him probably, with the other cheap quarterbacks. And then as far as DVP goes, this is one, again, Oregon State's not on the main slate very often. I don't think they've ever been this year. And I'm sure most people don't bother watching Oregon State games outside of fans or true sickos. But this is a really good, like, tier A DVP spot. Running backs have absolutely shredded Oregon State. Like, they like to run the ball, but they cannot stop the run for anything. Taking a look back here, Nevada game, Savion Red, 137 yards, 4 touchdowns. Also, Brennan Lewis nuked them as a dual threat. Avery Morrow from Colorado State, 140 yards and a touchdown. Devin Maccabee, who was completely dead and then risen from the grave a la Undertaker in this game against Oregon State, 168 yards and a touchdown. And now he's playing good again.
And then at Oregon, when they played Oregon State, it was a blowout, but James rushed for 86 yards, 2 touchdowns. They let Whittington play. He rushed for 64 yards and a touchdown in the second half. Put those together, that's 3 touchdowns and 150 yards for one running back. So the problem is, if it's Jaden Ott, I don't think we can take advantage of this DVP spot because he's expensive. And then also, he's just not healthy. They tried to play him against Miami. He had 7 carries for a yard. He did score. So he actually put up 20 against them because of the touchdown. But I don't think he's ready. I don't know that. And I think they have to be honest with themselves about how many games they're going to win. He hasn't looked right even when he's played. They've set him out the last couple. He has tried to practice. My main worry there is we pay that price for Ott. Yeah, it's a great matchup, but the first carry, he re-aggravates something or he's not 100%. So we can't use Ott to take advantage of it. But if Ott is out, which is the best case scenario, and perhaps as a later game, we get that news later so that less people have the opportunity to make a swap. But if Ott's out, I don't know how I wouldn't be all in on Javian Thomas. And that might be a lot of people thinking that, maybe not. I'm not sure quite yet, but Javian Thomas is only 4.8K, much more agreeable price for what we want to do with our lineups. And he's proven to be a fantasy relevant option when given those opportunities. 78 yards and 2 touchdowns last week in that loss to NC State without Ott. 72 yards and a touchdown against Pittsburgh the week before without Ott. And then if we go all the way back to week 3 against SDSU, Ott was, in and out, 169 rushing yards for Thomas. So clearly a dominant force when given these opportunities. And again, I can't stress enough how this is a tier A DVP spot. But it's just so funny because if it's Ott, I just don't like it at all. If it's Thomas, I'm completely all in. So we'll monitor that news and see. Right now, it seems like there's a 50-50 shot when it comes to Jaden Ott playing. I feel like it's just really rough. The fact that he's practicing means they're probably going to try to play him. But it's going to be one of those situations, at least on the main slate, we should get that news. There was a late slate a couple of weeks ago where Ott warmed up, had his jersey on, was practicing with the ones, and then didn't play at all, and Thomas went off. So something to be aware of there with that news, and we'll do our best to get that out Saturday morning. When it comes to the receiving room, Jack Endries, it's been him at the tight end position and not Corey Deshays. Deshays coming into it from Maryland. I thought he was a good fit in this offense. Now he's been out the last couple of games, which has led to Endries absolutely nuking back-to-back games over 100 yards. This is honestly, like I said, a very good offense for the tight end. It's been him, not Corey. Leads the team in targets with 32, but you look at his last 2 games and overall his season, 28 catches for 366 yards, 2 touchdowns. So that's good for a tight end. But the last 2 games, he's been targeted 20 of those 32 times, and he's caught 17 for 220 and a touchdown. So majority of his production in the last 2 games, Mendoza making it a point to find the tight end. The receiving room's all banged up, battered. Tobias Merriweather hasn't been healthy yet. Deshays, as I mentioned, has missed the last 2 games. Tron Grizel has been okay at times. Naziah Hunter early in the season had been the main receiver there, but at this point, Endries is priced at 4K. Been so good. That's another guy in that low 4K range that I think does see some ownership there, which further pushes Javian Thomas down to the sub 5% realm, because people aren't going to want to play 2 Cal, which I wouldn't blame them. But depending on that nuke shakes out, I think we have a really big edge spot with Javian Thomas here. But Endries as the chalky option. Giovanni McCoy and Javian Thomas together combine sub 5% and combining for 40 fantasy points would be the absolute play of the year. And I'd be super psyched if that works out. Don't know if it will, but you know me, I'm not afraid to try it. So we'll see how everything happens. That breaks down the slate. We're all done there. We're going to move on to some Underdog, PrizePicks, betting stuff, and then we'll talk about core and slate breakers. I have 3 for each site, so I'll just rattle those off, and then you can give us yours. Old reliable Cam Ward, over 316.5 passing yards. It's been around 305. I'm going to just keep taking it. It was real close last week, but he got there. I think Cam Ward continues to do his thing. LJ Martin, over 76.5 rushing plus receiving yards. He catches passes. I think he rushes for near 100 yards, so that number is very low to me. And then Max Brosmer, over 205.5 passing yards. You can pass on Maryland, and I think he will. On Underdog, Will Howard over 257.5 passing yards. Jeremiah Smith over 74.5 receiving yards. Correlation. And then Jake Retzloff, it's 213.5 passing yards. I do like the over, even though I think LJ Martin has a big game. I think Retzloff is good for like 220 to 230. So I'll take the over there on Underdog as well. And I'll have some more loaded up in the article when it drops tomorrow afternoon. What are some of the prize picks and or Underdog plays that you like, my good sir?
Yeah, so going back to that Nebraska-Ohio State game, mentioned the Judkins injury, and so we might see a little bit more Travion Henderson than usual. So going to go over 62.5 rushing yards with him. That's giving them a fairly even split because they have Judkins projected for 65.5, and so I think we get more like 85 to 90 from Henderson. Maybe get him cracking the century mark. We'll see. Also, in the rushing yards category, gonna go under 79.5 on Henry Parrish. I think they probably maybe turn it over to Bentley a little bit more than we are used to, and so maybe we get a defensive score too. Just not a lot of volume to Henry Parrish this week. And then on to the receptions category. Good old Cam Camper sits there at 4.5 receptions, and teams are so focused on Junty that we've seen Camper involved a little bit more of late. And I think we can take an over a PPR god of yesteryear. But I think we can still get over 4.5 receptions with Cam Camper. That's on the Friday slate.
Yeah, Boise State, that's going to be a real fun game. Looking at that one as a potential playoff seat driver. All right, so looking at the core plays here, not too exciting this week for me. At quarterback, Chandler, it's very obvious, but Morris. At running back, Mekhi Hughes, and then at wide receiver, Jeremiah Smith. I'm just, 2 weeks ago, or was 2 or 3 weeks ago against Iowa, was married to the Egbuka play. They both did well, but this week it's all about Jeremiah for me. There goes my camera.
Okay. So I was going to use Chandler Morris, so we'll switch it up a little bit. I'll go with my little bit more off the wall call with Luke Altmaier in the core at quarterback. We'll use LJ Martin at running back. And sorry, who'd you use? It used Jeremiah Smith at receiver.
Yeah,
so
Jeremiah Smith. Yep.
I'll use DT Sheffield because you opened that one up for me in the core receiver.
Yeah, I didn't want to take them all from you. All right, and then that takes us pretty much to slate breakers. Let me get through bets here. I'll give a couple of bets that I'm looking at here, and then we'll get your slate breaking call, a touchdown call, and then we'll get out. I have two from the free one, but I'll give a couple here. Tulane versus North Texas. It's 67.5, not 68. It's a high total, but I do like the over here. I think there's still value on that as it goes well above 70. Kansas. Their total versus Kansas State. That is the Sunflower battle. That one is at 55.5. I do like the over there. I think that one is a clear instance of two programs that can't defend really at all. So that total seems extremely low to me. I will be taking the over 55.5 on that one. And then Wisconsin, I don't know, something about Braden Locke and Tawi Walker saving this program this year. They are home dogs against Penn State, plus 6.5. I like that one. I think Penn State ekes it out, but it's like a 3-point win for Penn State. So I do think we get some major value. Wisconsin, plus 6.5.
Over or under 20 catches for Tyler Ward?
Oh God. It's probably, I'm going to say under, but probably like 15 the way that he's looking, and 2 rushing touchdowns for good measure.
Yeah. Why not?
All right, so he's the slate breaker, I guess. But that does take us to the slate breaker for the slate here. Who do you got? Took a week off. I took my crack at it. I had Zachary Franklin. Didn't work out, but let's get back on track. Who is that player that is going to lead us into the promised land this week?
Yeah, so I was pretty bummed to see that Oklahoma State wasn't on the slate for this main slate. That would have been such a good game to have on this slate. Baylor, Oklahoma State. I turned 40 on Saturday, and I had this whole thing planned of doing Ollie Gordon as the slate breaker and doing the I'm 40, come after me, I'm a man. Wanted to just do that whole thing, and I was like, hold on, they're not even on the slate. I can't do that. So we're gonna have to go with the team of destiny, BYU, LJ Martin for 24 carries for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns to go along with 4 catches for 40 yards and a touchdown through the air. Big day from LJ Martin to lead BYU to victory over Central Florida.
I absolutely love it. LJ Martin is just such a I got him in best ball and such a favorite player for me. So I love hearing that. In my first run of a main team, he was in that first run. So I'm in total alignment there. Let's get it with our guy LJ Martin. And then I have a touchdown call here in that TCU Texas Tech game. Rolling with Jeremy Payne. First touchdown score. It's plus 1,400. They're sour on Cam Cook. I think if TCU gets that first possession, get a Jeremy Payne first touchdown scored at plus 1,400. His anytime's only plus 155, so he's definitely going to score, but we need that first one. All right, I think that will wrap us up. Plenty of hot takes here, and hopefully they'll still be hot takes when the day's over, and not turn into cold takes. We have a lot of content coming your way. College basketball season is beginning on November 4th. Myself, Mike Randall, and a few others putting out college basketball team previews and conference previews as we speak. There will be the main slate article and prop betting piece dropping tomorrow afternoon. Then Jake will have the night slate write-up for you on Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock, the Q&A session. We'll chew on all that news and see about what clarity we've gotten. And then, of course, we'll be right back here same time for Week 10 Super Show breakdown at 9 p.m. PST on the FTN network. Appreciate all the continued support you guys give us. Jake, glad to have you back. Doing the show solo last week was a strain on my voice. Always happy to rap with you. Looking forward to window trips and green screens. Appreciate it, guys. Take care. Best of luck, and we will see you on Saturday.